Well, hello. It's a pleasure to be spending my evening with you. I know it's a little bit of a time difference where you are versus me, but my name is Maya Shoulder. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in September of 2023, have undergone a few surgeries, and have really found a fantastic community here with Connecting to Cure. And I'm very, very, very excited to be able to spend some time with you and to hear about the fantastic book. A little bit about myself you just heard, but I would love to introduce David Soren, who I have the pleasure of speaking with today. David Soren grew up in Canada and now lives in California with his wife and two children. He is a graduate of Sheridan College's classical animation program where he has spent over 20 years at DreamWorks Animation, contributing to beloved films like Shrek, Chicken Run, and How to Train Your Dragon, all of which I love dearly. And then later directing and co-writing Turbo, Captain Underpants, and Under the Boardwalk. His debut book, Invisible, is a powerful story about an 8-year-old boy newly diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Written for middle grade readers, the book takes an honest look at what it means to live with a chronic illness, exploring themes of friendship, acceptance, and the courage to share your diagnosis. Thank you, David, very, very much for spending some time with us today. And I know I speak for the whole Connecting to Cure community in the fact that we are so appreciative to have a little time to chat with you today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and appreciate that you are doing this.
Absolutely. I am very lucky that I got my own copy and was able to read it very quickly because it was that good. But for
Thank you.
anyone who hasn't read it yet or just wants to know more about the book, would you mind just starting off by telling us a little bit about Invisible, please?
Sure. Yeah. So Invisible is inspired by my experience growing up with a chronic invisible disease, in this case, Crohn's disease. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and as I say in the book, some parts are true, some parts are kind of true, and some parts are totally made up because I have an overactive imagination. And it was just more fun to do it that way. Um, it's about a boy named JJ Sugar who, just like me, was 8 years old when he discovered he could draw better than anyone else in his class. And that same year, also finds out that he has Crohn's disease.
Mm.
So finds his gift and finds his curse in the same year. Um, Except where it gets more fantastical is that when the doctor drops the diagnosis, JJ realizes that he's no longer alone on the exam table. Sitting next to him is his disease. In this case, it looks like a giant, gross, insufferable creature named Norm. JJ's desperate to keep Norm hidden and stay normal at all costs. The good news is that his disease is invisible. Bad news, Norm is determined to be seen. So that's the gist of the book.
Ooh, sounds quite interesting and a lot of conflicting characters and personalities as a child is figuring out what his new normal looks like.
That's right. Yeah,
It's
learning to
very
live
fascinating.
with an invisible disability. Yeah.
So, a little bit about the title that you mentioned. So, as you addressed in the title, Invisible is a very personal and sort of true story, as you mentioned. Would you consider JJ Sugar to be a pseudonym, or do you see him as his complete own character,
Right.
separate from you?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's kind of both.
Mm-hmm.
Because the character's so intertwined with my own story, it is a bit of both. When I was for years, I was trying to figure out how to tell this story and whether I was even ready to talk about my disease,
Yeah.
whether it should be a memoir or whether it should be fiction. Um, all those kinds of questions, trying to iron them out. And ultimately, I felt that it would be more powerful to tell a story that kids, in this kind of like teen tween age,
Mm-hmm.
could really get invested in and invested in a character and invested in the kind of the journey of this character. And a story felt more satisfying to tell and more engaging than like some old guy kind of reminiscing about their past. I was not somebody who particularly loved reading memoirs when I was that age. So I think given, the movies I've made and the audiences those movies appeal to, it felt like this was the right way to go. So JJ was created as a way to, fictionalize parts of my life when it served the story, and
Totally.
to allow for this kind of interaction with his disease, which is obviously visualized in a different way than it is for most of us. But
Yes,
it was about capturing the how it feels to live with, Crohn's or in any invisible disease. Ideally, was sort of the larger goal, uh, and this felt like the best way to kind of tell that story in a way that could be true to the specificity of my story, but be universal at
hmm
the same time, and speak to a larger audience. That was really what I wanted to do.
I love that. I think your blending of your professional passions as well as your lived experience are really clear and evident throughout the book. And I like that there's some anonymity to your true story because then it really helps the readers get really invested in who JJ even is, as well
Right.
as Norm and the other characters as well.
Right. Yeah, and being able to read about a character your own age for these kids, for the audience for this book, or
Totally.
parents reading it to their kids, because it does deal with the family dynamics as well,
hmm
and how everybody involved in a chronic disease is implicated, whether it's the patient or the friends or the family, the
Absolutely.
caregivers, right? It's all a big support network.
Definitely. And speaking of that familial experience, in the book, JJ and his mom both are diagnosed with Crohn's disease,
Mhm.
yet they're monsters, Norm and then the mom's Francie, couldn't appear more different. And I'm curious how important it was to you to individualize each, so to speak, monster or disease,
Mhm.
and how that in turn helps prove and show that every single person's experience with an illness, whether it be Crohn's or a different chronic illness, can be different.
Yeah, well, that was exactly it, right? I mean, you
hmm
could have 10 people in a room that all have Crohn's, and their stories there would be common traits, and there would be things that were wildly different as
For
well.
sure.
And so it felt like, and even with my mom does have Crohn's, so that wasn't
Mm,
made up parts. Um, she genuinely has Crohn's, and it made my life a lot easier in those early days because when I started getting sick, they knew what to look for sooner
yes.
than they would have otherwise. And most of the challenges that I went through, she had already experienced. So there was, I was very fortunate in that way, to have her in my life, and helping steer me, in ways that were more helpful than others might have to deal with, right? Where you're kind of floundering, trying to figure out what's going on and how to deal with it. Um, but yes, they are very different in the book in terms of what their diseases look like. Norm is this biker beast from from JJ's bowel that kind of leaps into the real life. The reason for that was my dad had a motorcycle when I was a kid,
Uh,
and would take me on long motorcycle rides. My gut would feel like scrambled eggs after I got off. I didn't really like going on the motorcycle rides with
I can imagine.
so it was like, all right, if my disease needs to be as annoying and irritable as possible, so like a biker dude seems like probably up there with the things that uh, would be least on my list of favorite
Yeah.
pastimes. I also, from a young age, have had this sort of visual metaphor in my head about what the whole journey of my whole journey, kind of from start to where I am now with Crohn's,
Mm,
um, was sort of this idea of like, in the beginning being stuck in the sidecar of a sidecar motorcycle, and the disease is driving and doing a terrible job of it and
yes.
swerving me off the road and like trying to make it the most hellish experience possible. And that the journey is really about kind of learning to um, take the handlebars, and figure out
I love
how to
that.
drive and, gain some degree of control over this disease. Um, and also own up to the fact that we can't control all aspects of it too, and we are stuck with it. So given that, that was sort of where Norm, uh, the imagery around Norm, just that I kept lingering with me, I wanted to kind of bring to life. And then Francie, um, which was my mom's character's disease,
Hmm.
um, was born out of this larger concept that these diseases in the book kind of do they do a number on their humans' lives in all
Yes.
kinds of different ways and are kind of dream killers or attempting to be dream killers, right?
Hmm.
And my mom grew up dancing. She was a dancer and like trained and went to school for it and studied all different kinds of forms of dance. And finally got a job teaching dance at a high school the year that her Crohn's really
Uh,
started to flare and act up. And in her case, it was a deal breaker for that career. She couldn't, it was a disease that ultimately made her body unable to kind of handle the strain of of what the disease was putting her through. And
hmm.
so, for her, that meant going back to school, finding something else that she could study, and ultimately developed a love of learning and got her master's, got her PhD, went as far as she could go in education,
Yeah.
and and ultimately that was what she found loved more than dancing even was this kind of this thirst for knowledge, and studied art education and museum education, and so Francie, her disease was, I, it seemed fitting that she should be a dancer, but like a terrible dancer, a very distracting dancer, somebody who could kind of rub it in her face. Um, I gave her three legs, so she'd be clumsy and
Yes.
awkward, um, and just her own unique way of torturing her human. So that was where these things came from, and again, it's sort of with the goal of capturing how it feels to
Hmm.
have a chronic disease, and how we all deal with it differently.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing. I definitely can understand the reason and intention behind a lot of that. It's interesting because we both have the same disease, but have had extremely different experiences. And at the same time, there were so many moments I was like, that could have been taken out of my own memory because so many similar situations. Corn is not something I've touched since prior
Yeah.
to my diagnosis because I've been so worried about how that might affect my digestive system. I love chocolate milk too. So there's just like so many of these little moments that I found to be really fascinating because yes, everything is so individualized, but there also is somewhat of a shared community or culture that comes out of
Yeah.
this in a weird way.
Yeah, well, for sure. With Crohn's, I'm sure everybody can relate to some compromises they're having to make in their lives
Yes,
that are present in the book. And if it's not Crohn's, it's something else. It's some other kind of compromise you're
exactly.
having to make, right? Or sacrifice, um, things that you have to give up, uh, which are all equally painful for everybody. And it may
Yes.
not be corn or popcorn or
Yeah.
chocolate milk, but it's something, right? So
That's right.
um, I think, again, kind of finding the universality and the specificity was really the key there.
And also just the concept of personifying a disease that is invisible. I think that really is the core of the book. And to explain it, because I'm hoping people will read this, even if they have never heard of Crohn's, have never heard of invisible illnesses. Like this is a fantastic way to educate, especially that middle school aged reader,
Yeah.
because I think, in society, someone sees a cast, they can immediately register that something is wrong with, there's an
Mhm.
injury going on. But I think that at the core of the book, as I mentioned, is the fact that even though I can't see this, does not mean nothing is going on. So I love the idea of making your disease its own entity
Mhm.
and exhibiting behaviors and things that would be invisible to others, but really impacts the patient. And I just think that's a fantastic way to frame it in a way that can help other people understand at a deeper level.
Thank you. Yeah, that was the big breakthrough, I think, when
Hmm.
from the various versions I explored over the years, when I hit on that idea of anthropomorphizing the disease,
Yes.
and making it a real character. At first, I got very excited because I could get revenge on it. I could make people
Mm,
laugh at it and poke fun
right.
at it, and you know, give give a little back to what it had done to me. Um, and then a weird thing happened as I started writing, because as a writer, you have to put yourself in the point of view of every character in the story,
Correct.
and write them accordingly. So suddenly I'm in the midst of trying to figure out, um, what is Norm's motivation? What is he thinking?
Mm,
What does he think about JJ? What does he think? What did my disease think about me? Does it truly want to ruin my life? Was there any part of my dream that it could get behind?
hmm.
Um, was there any part of me that it secretly wanted to be friends with? What was that inner life of the disease? And it started to change my relationship with it, in writing these scenes with him, um, which sounds bizarre, but it was a fascinating way to kind of
Yeah.
get out
Explore
of your
that.
own head
Hmm.
and body about this thing and see it from another perspective, and what kinds of complaints it would have about me, and how I'd behaved over the years. And I think where the common ground among all of the various invisible disabilities in this book, and Norm's part of a big biker gang called the Invisibles that all hang out once a month
Yeah.
and blow off steam at a biker bar, and then like have their own support groups to complain about their
Yep.
humans. Um, their one main kind of dream is to be made seen by their humans, that their humans
Hmm.
all like initially kind of don't want to acknowledge their existence, and they just want to be seen. Um, which is really sweet at the end of the day.
Right.
And how many people, kids, teenagers, adults, just keep this side of themselves hidden. And I think it happens. It's very easy for that kind of behavior to be established at a young
Hmm.
age, because when you're a kid, you don't want to stand out. You don't want to be different from other people, especially in ways that are, um, could be seen as like, you know, make you less than or frail or sick, or right. All
Hmm.
these things that I think we all fear, um, and keep this to ourselves because we don't want people to think that way about us. Um, so that was something that I just felt like, if I could somehow speak to that common desire of wanting to keep this thing hidden at all costs, which I think anyone can relate to,
For
whether it's
sure.
a disease, or some other aspect of our lives that we don't want to talk about, that we're afraid to share with people, and say, hey, well, let's look at this. Like, is this really the best way to operate? Are we really doing ourselves a favor?
Hmm.
And as a community, um, are we ensuring that the stigma stays alive by hiding it? That the only way we
Yes.
can start to make this better is to make it easier to talk about, um, and less scary, and less feeling like there's going to be these grave consequences if we
Hmm.
let this stuff out. So to be able to create a story for teens and who are very much in that mode, um,
Yes.
was what I wanted to try to do, was find a way to tell them like it's okay, you're not alone, and it's not that bad. And in fact, the more you start to talk about it, the easier it gets,
Better
and
it is.
the better it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I
Doesn't make the
appreciate you
disease go
sharing that.
away, unfortunately, but
Yeah, if
it
only it was
makes
that
it
easy.
makes living with it, less fraught.
hmm I think, yeah, this book, in addition to a lot of amazing resources that are out there, can really help ground people and realize that it doesn't have to be a fight with your disease, but rather asset might not be the right word, but it is a part of you that you can use for good. And I think you've done a great way of showing that.
Thank you.
Going a little bit deeper into your writing process, I would love if you could share either the hardest or your most favorite scene to have written. I know it's a very vulnerable piece of work. You're having to look inward and reflect on your own experience with an invisible illness.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear about, yeah, either a favorite or most difficult part to write.
Um, the whole experience of writing it was incredibly gratifying. But
Mm,
every chapter was, I would start with a blank page and just take a deep breath and figure out how to attack it. There were many parts of it that I could mention. I think the biggest thing that I wanted to get across was the chronic nature of the disease.
hmm
That and how somebody who is recently diagnosed with this kind of has to grapple with this thing that you can treat it, it gets better, it gets worse, there's surgeries, there's recovery, but that's not a cure, right? This isn't at the
Correct.
moment an uncurable disease. And how to reflect that in a way that felt true to the experience of having it, and yet not um, the biggest bummer of an ending of all movies and books. Like, um, and story structure in general goes in three acts. And there's
That's
sort of a
right.
low, there's sort of the classic story structure is that there's a low point at the end of Act Two, and the character kind of overcomes whatever that major obstacle is that's taking it to rock bottom, and corrects some of the patterns, and then you know we get to our happy ending. um, that structure didn't work for a chronic disease. So I needed
That's right.
to, like in that structure, like a surgery would happen at the end of Act Two, and then there would be a cure, right?
Happily
Uh,
ever after, right?
right, right. So I really needed to kind of figure out, all right, well, you know, surgery is going to be midpoint, I think,
hmm
because there needs to be enough growth and change in thinking, um, so that the next time surgery is necessary, we have a slightly different uh, outcome. Um,
hmm
so that was a really fascinating challenge from a writing perspective. Just writing about disability in general is it's a very sensitive thing, right? I mean, it's so I um, wanted to do my homework and really try to, both in terms of representing the Crohn's and colitis community, but also, invisible disabilities at large,
hmm
um, and and find ways to, again, like we talked about, represent how it feels, you know, in general, to have these things going on in our lives. Um, and then the difference between visible and invisible disease too. I think there's a scene in the movie where JJ goes to a figure skating competition
I
that
was going to mention just that. Yeah.
that
That's a perfect
wa-
example.
was one in my life where I mean, that did happen to me,
hmm
but it happened a little differently. I mean, it was yeah, I was forced to square off against a kid with a pretty severe visible disability. I don't know. I never knew what it was.
hmm
But the kid had a lot of trouble standing up and, fell uh, dozens of times over the course of this competition. And all I wanted to do was let the kid win.
Yeah.
because I hated figure skating. I didn't even want to be there. So he clearly did. Um, so that one was a really good exercise to sort of, again, isolate the difference between visible and invisible
Hmm.
uh, diseases and disabilities. At, I think what I learned in that exercise was that the biggest difference, obviously, is what you see on the surface. The person with a visible disability, people are looking at that person and making assumptions. Um, they're not looking at who the person is as an
That's right.
individual first. They're looking at the disability first and either moving on and judging them or not taking the time to get to know them deeper, right? Um, and that's awful. Like that's a horrible thing to have to deal with on a daily basis.
Yes,
And yet they do have to confront it on a daily basis and deal with it in ways that people with invisible disabilities don't need to. We can hide it. We can pass ourselves off as normal, quotes, normal, right? But that's damaging too. So, and a lot of
absolutely.
people may not even believe us if we were to say something. They're like, you look fine.
But you don't look sick,
You don't
so
look
are you
sick.
really not okay? Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Are you not coming to the party because you really don't feel
Your
good? Or are you
stomach hurts. Yeah.
right, right.
Yep.
So there's all kinds of other issues that come up around it that we deal with that they don't have to deal with in the same way. Um,
That's right.
both are, you wouldn't want to wish either on anyone, but
Hmm.
it was good to be able to kind of label the core differences there in that scene.
Fantastic. Moving along a little bit. One thing that this book shows is how being sick or knowing someone who's dealing with an illness
Yeah.
can make you or others more aware of other people in the same boat and what they're going through. And I'm
Mhm.
curious if that awareness and empathy has translated or helped you with any other aspects of your life.
Um, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's helped me as a writer, for sure,
Mm,
as a director, because I'm used to thinking about myself and how others are feeling as well. Like I know how
yeah.
I want to be treated if I'm not feeling well. If I'm working with when I make animated movies, there's often like a team of 400 people that I'm steering. Um,
Hmm.
people have lousy days, they have lousy weeks, they get sick, this stuff happens and
Life happens.
life happens. They have problems with their family, you know. Um, so yeah, definitely sort of putting yourself in other people's shoes, giving them some grace in terms of, just letting them kind of have their moment, you know,
Yes.
goes a long way. And ultimately, people, you know, really appreciate being treated with that kind of kindness. Um, I have kids. I have an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old right now. And just the experience of having kids forces you to, have enormous empathy
Hmm.
and understanding. Growing up with Crohn's, when I did in the period of time when I was young, most people didn't know what it was. So to have to tell somebody about it meant you were also having to explain what it was.
Yes.
And I wasn't a doctor. I wasn't comfortable. I didn't really have the language to explain it.
And it
If I
shouldn't have to be your
did,
job. Yeah.
right. Or in a job for sure, in a work environment too. It's sort of like, do you
Hmm.
really want to, like, there's times where sharing it is probably not appropriate.
Yes.
It's not like I would recommend everybody doing it at all times to every single person they meet. Everybody kind of has to find their own timeline around this and whether they're even comfortable doing it. I'm not by any means trying to say you have to do this or else you're going to be miserable. Um,
Hmm.
everybody's going to have their own approach. Um, but yeah, that was I just think the empathy and understanding have kind of they come up in all kinds of different ways, and hopefully it made me a better person all around for it.
I would think so. I know we talked a little bit about the intentions and the core messaging of the book, but I'm also curious, is there any specific hope for what you're intending for people to take away after they're reading? I know that even though this is targeted at middle school age readers,
Mhm.
I found a lot that I could take away from myself, as well as I'm sure people of all ages, whether they're
Mhm.
physicians, patients, what have you. So I'm curious what your your goal is when people read this and what they're going to take away from it.
Yeah, I mean, the goal really was that I wrote the book that I wish I'd been given as a kid,
Yep.
so that maybe it can help others get to the place I got to sooner. And so they don't have to spend so much of their lives keeping arguably the most important part of themselves invisible.
Hmm.
That's where the title came from. That's what it's all about. Um, and don't get me wrong, like I'm sitting here and I'm still uncomfortable talking about it. It's not like suddenly I got to a place and boom, like
Yeah.
this is a piece of cake. I
It's a
can
process for sure.
it's a process and it's and yet I'm sort of been forcing myself to do it um because it helps. And I
Hmm.
think writing the book helped enormously. I didn't want the book to feel like therapy. I can go to a therapist. I don't need people to read that. I don't think that was going to be very fun for anyone. Um, but I do hope that it helps others, in reading this, and they can see themselves in it, like you've talked about, which is wonderful. And what I've found is that every time I do share my story and I kind of push past that fear, uh, my only regret is like not doing it sooner.
Mm,
It hasn't yet backfired on me.
yeah. I I know my diagnosis is more recent than yours, and at the same time, once I started discussing with other people what I was going through and sharing my story, I felt so much more liberated because it was instead of shameful, I was trying to pivot it to be an empowering
Hmm.
situation. And I think sharing it with others has been so cathartic and has helped heal part of my grieving process of what my life looked like before
Yeah.
Crohn's, and it'll never be what it was. And at the same time, I have gained so much from
Hmm.
this diagnosis, and it has brought me to this conversation today. And I have found such a fantastic community because I've spoken out and spoken up about it. So it's been
That's so
important for
wonderful.
me to reframe what I've found to be a lot of disadvantages and negative moments,
Hmm.
traumatic moments into a positive, how can I use this for good and educate others and things like that. And that might not seem feasible to a lot of people, and everyone will find their own journey with that. But just to share my own experience for a moment, I found that speaking out has been very advantageous.
That's fantastic. And kudos to you, especially being so fresh into your
Thank
diagnosis.
you.
And uh, I mean, it's a wonderful thing to be able to try to look at the positive side of this stuff. And I think there is an upside to it. I mean,
Hmm.
I've really found that um, it has been the fire in my belly um, all these years.
Literally.
Literally,
Yeah.
yeah, literally, and metaphorically, both.
Yeah.
It has been that, and some of that comes from trying to make the most of the time I feel good and
Yeah.
not knowing when the rug's going to get pulled out, um, which adds this kind of like maddening ticking clock at times. But
Right.
I also want to use that time where I feel good. I want to use every second of it. Um, and create a body of work that people um, remember me for as well. And And now this is part of that, which is cool. They're
Yeah,
not two separate things anymore. So
that's exactly right. And like you said, you wish you had this book when you were first diagnosed, even though it was only a few years ago for me. I feel that same way, and it has almost healed part of that process for me because now I have something that is so relatable in a way that makes it a little bit easier.
yeah. Well,
So I just,
there's confidence that comes
yes,
with vulnerability, right? And I think that's what we learn as we
absolutely.
get older. It's hard to convince somebody of that when they're younger.
Yes.
That being vulnerable is actually strength.
Hmm.
But uh, so we can sit here in hindsight and say
Of
that's the
course.
case. Um, Again, kind of the reason why I wanted to tell this story so that people go on a journey
Hmm.
with this character. It's also very uncommon to have a character with a disability at the center of a story, any story,
Yep.
you know?
Representation is
Yeah,
definitely lacking.
very lacking. And Crohn's representation, like almost nil.
Yeah.
Um, so that was a huge, I mean, I think that's just whether you like the book or not. The fact that there's the hero in the book is a kid with Crohn's disease is landmark.
Very much so. I know that you've written and co-directed and co-written and directed lots of animated movies, and you've contributed to some of the biggest franchises like Shrek and Madagascar. I'm curious if you don't mind touching a little bit on how, if at all, these experiences have helped you when writing your first book.
Yeah, I mean, they've all shaped me as an artist and
Mm-hmm.
in different ways, and I cut my teeth on all those movies you just rattled off.
Yeah.
Um, I've gotten to work with amazing people. I've gotten to find my own voice creatively on those movies over the years. I think when I first came out of school, um, I got recruited I was lucky I got recruited by DreamWorks right out of college, but I was, uh, right at the beginning, and there were all these amazingly talented people. Um, and I got to learn from all of them, and then also kind of learned when I disagreed with them about things.
Mm-hmm.
People would say trust the process when I started um, on those early movies, and I would go along with it because they seemed like they knew what they were talking about. But decisions were getting made that I didn't really agree with, and then I'd see
Mm,
the final product of the movies and occasionally be like, "Yeah, that didn't really work out." The That trusting the process thing on this one, I think that this could have been a lot better, or this part of it could have been a lot better. Um, and I realized, I mean, I don't think that's the mantra to live by. I think you trust the people that earn your trust,
mm-hmm.
and that you respect, and that helped me kind of find my own voice and ability to pipe up. And a lot of directors back then were loud. They were the sort of the loudest people in the room, and I was always an introverted person, but I could I could find my voice through the work and the strength of my opinions about the work. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's just so many hundreds and hundreds of lessons that kind of brought me to
Yeah.
the ability to kind of feel like I had the skills and the confidence in those skills to be able to tackle this story. I just don't think I would have been ready to do it otherwise. Um, or it would have been a very different story.
I love that you used your professional experience to fortify the product that is this book. So it's really interesting to hear. And as a writer and illustrator, can you give us a little sneak peek into what your creative process is like? Is there anything that you found to be particularly surprising as you went about the creation of the book in terms of your creative process at all?
Um, yeah, I mean, as I've always drawn and I've always told stories.
Mm-hmm.
So those two skills were always kind of there, and maturing as I matured. But um, and my process is basically a combination of drawing and writing, and the two kind of inform each other. So when I got the idea that that the disease would become a character named Norm, uh, who was basically like, I'm the new Norm kid. Uh, I the first thing I did was figure out what it looked like. I couldn't really start writing it until I figured out what it looked like. So that process was also an extension of what does it feel like to have these diseases,
Hmm.
when you have a Crohn's flare, it's painful, it's painful in the stomach. So I'm like, what on this character can be painful? Like if he was going through my bowels, those sharp, pointy beard spikes,
It would hurt.
they would hurt. And the rumble of the motorcycle and obnoxious, the loudness, the gurgling, all of those kind of like disgusting aspects of the disease
Hmm.
that make us embarrassed to talk about it often, I could give to him. Um, and then it really was kind of going back and forth, in terms of writing. And I typically got that drawing, I got it to a place I was happy with, and then wrote the book, and then went through and illustrated. I've admired writers and illustrator like Roald Dahl and Quentin Blake, were my two like heroes, of kind of the perfect marriage of words. That's like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and
Yes.
the Twits and Matilda. Um, just an illustrator who perfectly captured what the author was writing,
Hmm.
and that marriage of those two was sort of, you kind of almost can't imagine one without the other. Or Maurice
Yes.
Sendak, like Where the Wild Things Are, was another one where like those were the kinds of artists that I admired. They were neither kind of
Mm.
just illustrator or just author. It was that kind of
A blend of both.
blend of both. So that was, for me, it was trying to make sure that the illustrations both weren't just illustrating what the words already said, but adding another layer to them, adding whether it's humor or energy or inner life of the character, or um, tell you something else that the words don't. You know, those are uh, the best kinds of illustrations do that, I think.
I totally agree. As my final question, could you give us a little insight into what's next for you as an author?
Yeah, well, the great thing was, when I wrote this,
Hmm.
uh, even though I wrote it without any publisher knowing, like there was no knowledge that anybody would publish this. The whole time I was concerned, honestly, that I'd submit it and nobody would want to put it out into the world, or they'd be turned off by by the idea of it, or the disease aspect. Um, but when we went out for submission, overnight, an editor at Penguin read it and offered me a two-book deal. So it was kind of
Congratulations. Yeah.
the first major kind of validation of like, wow, going out on a limb and taking this
Hmm.
risk, um, was not only like personally gratifying, but people want this kind of story.
That's right.
There's not a lot like it out there. So that means, what you can look forward to is a follow-up called Visible that comes out this time next year. So
I love it.
fall of 26. Um, the adventures of JJ and Norm continue, and
I'm excited
more challenges ahead and more fun ahead. So
because, as we know, chronic illness is chronic
that's
and
right.
it is never ending until we find a cure.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to that. I will be the first to pre-order. And in the meantime, I'm hopeful that everyone will buy Invisible wherever you can find your books. I really do think this should be required reading for everyone,
Thank
but
you. It's also on
it
audiobook. So anybody
even
who's like
better.
a reluctant reader, I've narrated it. I'm doing a ton of ridiculous voices through
I
it.
love it. You
Uh,
can add
you know,
voice actor to your resume
yeah, yeah.
now.
So if if you're a reluctant reader and the thought of reading a book is daunting, listen to it.
I will say the illustrations make it all the more fun to read.
Thank you.
Well, David, I want to thank you very, very much for your time. It's been a very enlightening conversation and it was fantastic to meet the very person who produced such an exciting read. I am excited to read the next one once it comes out, and am very, very confident that our community here will find a lot of insight into all of your work. And I want to thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your experience with the greater community.
Thanks so much, Maya. Appreciate it.